Today's topic is a very controversial one.
Who's there? Connecting rod. That's good.
So today's topic is definitely a controversial one. These Mark 1 GTIs seem to be just shooting up in value, more specifically on Bring a Trailer. If you're not familiar with Bring a Trailer, it's basically like eBay but for classic and valuable cars only. So it's auction format, and in my opinion is one of the best ways to determine the value of a car. It's kind of hard for people to argue, hey, that car is not worth $15,000 to $20,000 as it's literally selling for $15,000 to $20,000. You know, I don't recall the very first one that caused a lot of commotion in the Facebook group, but one of the early ones that did, you know, everybody was up in arms. 10-15 years ago, something like this you'd struggle to get $1,000 for. Unfortunately, I was into Mark 4s during that time, but I hear about it all the time. I didn't see it firsthand, but I have a bunch of friends who, you know, primarily the ones who are upset by these values going up or these prices going up. You know, they'll jump right out and say, you know, I remember when you could buy a car like that for $500 left and right. You know, people were sending them to the junkyard. So ultimately, what I want to talk about is, are these Mark 1 GTIs worth a premium? And my answer to that is it depends heavily on what makes you want to buy one. Because by today's standards, this car is slow, it's spongy, you know, you got all this body roll, it's a tin can, it's loud inside, it's really not that comfortable of a car. When they were being sold, they weren't exactly being sold as a luxury car though, so I'm not really trying to hold this up to today's standards. And if you'd like to know more about the history and why these became so popular, I'd strongly recommend going to watch Donut Media's Everything You Need to Know video on the GTI. They paved the way for these nice small practical cars during a time where everything was massive and heavy and inefficient, bad on gas. Strongly recommend that video because he does a better job of explaining it than I ever could. The first one or two cars that sold, you know, within the last year or two for big money, everybody was fighting and arguing over if that was fair or not. And, you know, rightfully so, because the first few to sell for that, you have to question, hey, is that really an accurate value on the car? But now, fast forward a year or two, and these things are selling left and right. It's seeming like, you know, 5 to 6 a year are selling for north of 10,000, very often north of 20,000. The reason why I decided to make this video was because just last week, one of these cars sold for $38,000. Yes, $38,000. The cost of a brand new Golf R. You could literally take that money and go buy a brand new Golf R right now instead. And somebody chose to spend that on a 17,000 mile old Mark 1 GTI. Some things to note about that car in particular though. It was low mileage, it was all original, and it had a Callaway turbo kit. For those of you who don't know, I strongly recommend looking up Callaway turbo for Mark 1 GTIs. Basically, it was a speed shop. There are a lot of people who don't know how to feel about this, and I don't blame them. Most of me is more than glad to see the prices of these cars increase because I own one of them. I deal with Mark 1s in general. If Mark 1 GTIs go up in value, then so do the rest of the rabbits. But that's also a problem, so we'll talk about that in a minute. But the one that sold on Bring a Trailer, again, low mileage, had Callaway turbo installed and had all the paperwork back from the original owner, back when the turbo kit was installed by Callaway themselves. So these are some pretty noteworthy things, and I think overall the price of that car was definitely justified. And furthermore, even if you don't think the price is justified, it was an auction format, so it doesn't get more justified than that. A car is worth what people are willing to pay for it, and somebody was willing to pay $38,000 for that GTI. Back when these cars came out, literally everybody and their mom had one. When I moved into our current house, the next door neighbor, the wife came out and said, "Oh, I had a diesel Rabbit when I was a teenager. It was my first car. It was diesel." When I'm daily driving one of these on a weekly basis, I get stopped somewhere with somebody wanting to talk about and tell me about the one that they used to have. There's a lot of nostalgia and sentimental value to these cars, especially to the people who were alive when these cars were being sold new. And even furthermore, people who owned one of these when they were still being sold. You know, chances are people who were paying $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 for one of these have that nostalgia attachment. When you're talking about paying almost $40,000 for one, it's flat out outrageous. I would never in a million years pay that much for one of these. But again, I think it's worth it all day long, because you have to realize that they're selling on an auction format site for what they're selling for. Here's the problem, and the part that I don't agree with in its entirety, because again, I'm more than glad to see any Rabbit I own go up in value. Because who wants to lose money on a car that they own? Nobody wants to lose money on a car they own. But there's a point where it becomes excessive, and within days of that $38,000 GTI auction coming to an end, you had people coming out of the woodwork with these very poor condition Rabbits and expecting top dollar for them. One guy had 2 GTIs and 1 diesel Rabbit, and he put the 3 up for $2,900. Both GTIs didn't run. They might have had motors in them, but they were non-running, non-driving, and the diesel Rabbit was the same thing. Didn't run. I think he said it turned over, but they were non-running cars in very poor condition. You know, he was trying to sell it as, you know, between the 3 of these, you could have a really nice one. You know, everybody wants to think that, but when you dig into it, half of those parts are going to be junk. Sorry, I don't mean to get too sidetracked, but he was more or less expecting $1,000 a piece for these non-running, very iffy Rabbits. Me personally, I wouldn't pay more than $300-400 a car for them, given the condition. You'd really have to see the pictures, you know. But take my opinion on what they would have been worth with a grain of salt. Because some people would pay more, some people wouldn't even pay that much. Another case, somebody posted up a 2-door late Westy diesel Rabbit, arguably one of the least desirable Rabbits ever made. Some people really love the diesel, so again, my opinion on that is up for discussion and purely just an opinion. But he's sitting there quoting these Bring a Trailer auctions, and he's expecting to get $3,000 for a car that's in very poor condition. The paint's really bad, the interior's really bad. It runs and drives. In my opinion, it was a $1,500 car on a really good day. And, you know, people thought I was joking, but I said to him, if you want to get $3,000 for this car, you need to dump $5,000 into it. And I'm not trying to be a wise ass when I say that. I'm being totally honest. For that car to be worth $3,000, you have to dump more than $3,000 into it. It's very hard, if not impossible, to make a profit on one of these late Westy Rabbits. So I know before I said I would never pay that much money for one, and some of you might ask, well, what would you pay for one? If it were super low mileage, I could probably do without the Callaway kit on that particular car. I'll see if I can leave a link in the description of that car. I don't know if Bring a Trailer keeps the listings up or if the seller chooses to delete it after. So I don't know if it'll be there, but that car in particular, what would I pay for it? Well, I wouldn't pay $38,000 for it. purely due to the age of everything. A car like that probably is going to need lots of new rubbers, and a car like that with that low of mileage and a Callaway turbo kit that was installed that long ago probably hasn't been taken apart and gone through. I didn't read the description top to bottom, so pardon me if it was gone through, but I'm pretty sure that car was not really gone through because of its low mileage. I don't blame the seller or the previous owners for not going through them, because why would you? It's an investment at that point. Some of those seals and gaskets and rubber items on the car are 40-something years old at this point. So it's only a given that no matter how well you store that car, you have the chance of things wearing out on it. They start to dry rot. They're rubber items. They're not going to last forever. This is just a fact of older cars. This one in particular is a prime example of that. Some of you might remember this car from the first video on this channel. This is a good friend of mine, JT's. We went and picked it up a few years ago. One of us found it and we went out together to go bring it back. And it was advertised to have like 95,000 miles and just, you know, only be driven once or twice a year. So I knew it might turn into a bit of a can of worms from the start, but more often than not, you get kind of lucky with these cars that are in that sweet spot where they were driven some, but not driven every day. But we had all sorts of little problems start surfacing once this car started being driven again. JT was daily driving this car for a while, and things just started to let go due to their old age. So again, I don't mean to get too sidetracked, but it's safe to assume that that car is really just going to be a investment and collector's item. I don't wish for these cars to sit undriven, but that car in particular, I kind of do hope it just gets stored away in somebody's collection and preserved. I mean, don't get me wrong, it would be beyond awesome to see that thing driven again and woken back up and be put to use like it was designed. One of the reasons why they will sell for big numbers like they have been is because they're getting harder to find, but every time you see one sell for big money, a bunch more pop out of the woodwork. People know about them sitting behind their grandfather's or neighbor's garage, and they go get their hands on it for cheap or what they think is cheap, and then suddenly they're trying to turn a profit on it without lifting a finger. What do I think something like this is worth? JT paid about $5,000 for this 5 or 6 years ago, and I think at the very least it's worth that he could make his money back on it. So I think if you put a weekend or two worth of work into shining this thing back up, you know, could use a driver's side door if you could find one with the original paint on it, because this one looks like it was swapped out at one point. So I would personally try to find an original black GTI door or just an original black Rabbit door, put the pinstriping on it, so that way you get original paint on as many panels as you can. But this particular car, I put a little bit of time and effort into it, and I think this is definitely close to a $10,000 car. There's no major rot. All the few things that are wrong with it are simple. You know, it needs a headliner. The passenger seat's in beautiful shape. It could use a driver's seat. What would I pay for it? Again, I don't think I would pay $10,000 for this, because I know where to look for them. I know that if you put in the legwork and find yourself one that's 10 hours away and you're willing to get a trailer and go pick it up, you could get your hands on one of these for $5,000 or less. And truthfully, I think you have to spend at least $5,000 to get yourself into a decent one like this. This comes back to one of the first things I mentioned in this video. It all depends on who you are and what you want out of one of these. The GTI I'm building, the red one, the budget build, I don't want to be into that car for even $5,000. I'm hoping to be into it for $3,000 or $4,000, and the reason why I'm going to be able to do that is because that car is crusty. It's got some rot. Overall, it's solid, but it needs a lot of work. The interior inside is trashed, and even when I'm done with it, it's just going to be a mechanically solid car. It's not going to be a show winner. It might be worth $5,000 on a really good day, which I'll be okay with. But I'm building that car to drive it, to enjoy it, to beat on it, to not be worried about it, to be able to take it to the grocery store, park it up front. If somebody bounces the cart off it, I don't care. A car like this, I would not want to take it, you know, I'd be hesitant to take it out every day and park it at the front of the parking lot at the supermarket. I personally would not be so quick to buy a car like this in this condition of this value. And that's mainly due to where I am financially in life right now. I would rather spend that money on the Mark 7. And I did exactly that. I think even 20, 30 years from now, when I go to retire, when I have that kind of money to play with on something I don't need, I still wouldn't be quick to buy that, because there's just a lot more car you can buy. I know plenty of people who buy these Mark 1 Rabbits that are in beautiful shape, or they put in the effort to make them beautiful showroom quality cars, but they don't drive them every day. They don't care to drive them every day, every week, or even every month. They like being able to look at them and enjoy them by looking at them, or just knowing that they have that investment or that asset sitting. You get people who just have that collection mentality where they just want to know that that car is in their collection. In defense of the people who don't agree with me, every time a car like this does shoot up in value like that, there's a bit of a bubble thing going on with them. You know, you could see that happen with the E30 M3s. I don't have my finger on the pulse with that. That might not be going up in value at all anymore. They might be going down in value, but they're definitely not increasing in value at the same rate as they were a few years ago. A few years ago, same thing. You could see the values just skyrocket. I think you have to spend $60,000, $70,000 to get your hands on one. So these are going through the same sort of inflation bubble right now. Even if you agree with these values, you have to admit that some of that is an artificial bubble right now. It's not going to be for another 10 or 15 years where it will truly be really, really hard to get your hands on one of these. I think that's the biggest factor for determining what a car is worth, is how easy you could get one. The people paying these top dollar numbers are typically going to be the people who have some kind of nostalgic attachment to it. They either were around these cars when they were younger, they owned one when they were younger. They either don't want to have to deal with, or just simply don't know where to start when it comes to doing a little bit of legwork and finding one of these on the forums or Craigslist. Places like Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, the forums, you have to put in the legwork and find these cars. You have to seek them out. You have to do your own sort of homework on them. You're dealing with people who only have 1 or 2 pictures in most cases, no pictures of the underside. You know, there's a lot that can go wrong when you're going to seek one of these out yourself. So Bring a Trailer presents them on a silver platter for you. They won't take anything without a certain amount of pictures. Every car that goes on there for even close to this amount of money, they have pictures front to back, top to bottom, inside and out, and every which way that you could think of. So I don't blame people for spending the money that they do on Bring a Trailer. I just have the resources, the knowledge, the time, and the willingness to go and find one of these cars for cheap. I did that with the red car. I drove 4 hours one way to get it. I drove another 4.5 hours the week before to get a donor car, to get interior parts for that. To build the GTI that I'm building, I'm basically using 3 different cars. I'm using the shell from that car itself. I picked up, if you look back, I went and picked up a black parts car that was running and driving, had body damage and really bad Bondo work. So I went and got that second car. Just the amount of time in the truck towing those 2 cars home puts me up over 12 hours. Well, I've got 15-20 hours just in drive time going to physically go get the 3 cars that it's taking me to make a somewhat decent, mechanically solid driver GTI. You know, money-wise, I'm gonna be into it for under $5,000, like I said. When you're spending the money on a Bring a Trailer car, you're putting in what, 5 hours worth of effort, a few minutes a day checking the auction site, mainly the last day of the auction, then a few phone calls, getting your transportation lined up if you're not just going to fly out there and drive it home yourself. Literally not having to lift a finger to get what is one of the cleanest GTIs on the market at the time in your hands. Overall, Bring a Trailer is a great place to buy a car if you have the money and are willing to spend that kind of money on a car. Can you get the car for cheaper? Yes, but there is going to be a trade-off. Whether it's finding it yourself, going really far to bring it home physically, or paying a transporter to get it, and you're taking that risk of not knowing what you're going to get when it shows up at your door. Or you're going to get a total basket case project like me. So to wrap this all up, yes, I do think these are worth what they're selling for on Bring a Trailer. It's been about 2 years now where we've watched this slowly evolve and snowball effect into what the market is now. It's not like this is 2 or 3 of these cars that have sold for this. Now, that's one end of the spectrum. The other end worth talking about is the cheapest GTI to have sold on Bring a Trailer recently. The values of these are all over the place. It really depends on who you are, what you're looking at, what you want out of the car. Prime example, a friend of mine, David, sold his GTI on Bring a Trailer like 2 weeks ago. He only got $7,600 for it, which I think overall is a good number for his car. If it were me, if I had the kind of money to spend and I were in the market for one of that caliber right now, I would definitely spend $8,000 to $10,000 on a car like David's. I'll leave the link in the description of that car because I see that that's still up. It's still, you can still look at the pictures, the description. But in short, it's a 16 valve, 2 liter. It's bored up to like a 2.1 liter. Weber carburetors, all sorts of aftermarket parts on it. So it's a totally different sort of build per se. It's home built, more or less, heavily modified. Has a little bit of rust in certain spots, nothing too major, nothing that would bother me, but there was some debate about it in the comment section. Specifically, there was a little bit of rust where the fenders bolt up and in that general area. But overall, a very solid, clean looking car. More of a daily driver sort of car. You know, you would really have to put an 8 valve back in that car and take a lot of the modifications off, put the stock wheels back on it to see north of $10,000 for a car like that. You know, pending like a test drive and all that, make sure it runs as well as it should, I would definitely pay $8,000 to $10,000 for a car like David's. So, you know, again, this is all opinion. This is all my own opinion. It's all subject to change as the days go on, as the cars become more or less available, as more of these cars get pulled out of the garages and fields, and people pass away, and you know, a lot of these GTIs were made. Ultimately, that's the one thing that people don't seem to really talk about, is there were a lot of these GTIs made. Surely they're not as abundant as regular rabbits, but it's not like there were only 2,000 of these cars made. I don't even know if there is an exact number of how many are made, but there are a lot out for sale. You know, if you put in the legwork, you could get one cheaper than the going rate of Bring a Trailer or even Facebook Marketplace. You know, I'm no professional driver, but I've definitely got a good variety of experiences under my belt. Comparatively speaking, these cars aren't great. So I'm not saying that a Callaway GTI would be a $38,000 experience if you're coming from really anything modern. I think Leah's Subaru Crosstrek is going to handle better than that car. But, you know, you have to take into account that a car is worth what somebody's willing to pay. When these are repeatedly selling for $10, $20, $30, and now almost $40,000 on an auction style website, it's no longer a fluke. You have to understand and realize that that's just what these are starting to be worth.